Hello, people. So, I want to talk about God stories. I'm going to be doing my God story on here soon, but I want to talk about someone else's God story. Now, what's a God story? A God story is basically someone sharing how they finally came to encounter God and maybe what happened after that encounter. For example, part of my God story, I tried to record it, but I ended up at 28 minutes, and I don't think anybody's going to watch that. So mine's going to be like a 10-parter, maybe more than that. But when I was in the Navy, there was this guy. I hated this guy. His name was Bicknell. And when I lived in the barracks, it was a co-ed barracks, um, 4 bedrooms off a main room. We lived in one of the other bedrooms. He used to always complain because we partied and made so much noise. Well, one night I had to give him a ride. I was a duty driver, it's a temporary job, and I worked midnights all the time when I was in the military. And I had to drive to get the mail at the headquarters and then bring it over to the squadron where all our planes were. And for some reason, he was with me that night, and he was telling me his God story. And he said how he was on the beach, homeless in California with no job, no money, and just in a bad situation. And some guy came along and told him his God story and how he accepted Christ. And so this guy Bicknell said he invited Christ into his life, and a week later he had $500 in his pocket, a car, a place to live, and a job in a week's time. And it just blew me away. It just made me like, wow, that's pretty crazy. And it was the first time I ever heard somebody had an answered prayer. And so the next night I was all alone, getting the mail, walking through that building in the darkness, and I cried out to God because I had stopped believing in God back in high school. And I said, God, if you're really there and you show me you're there in some little way, so I know that you're really there, I'll give my life to you and I'll live for you all the rest of my days on planet Earth, and I'll follow you and I'll live for heaven because I know that's where it's going to be. And I prayed that out loud. And 4 months later, I'd forgotten that prayer, and then it suddenly came back to me. But I want to talk about someone else's God story here. Um, the most powerful king of Babylon, his name was Nebuchadnezzar. You Google his name, Google the Hanging Gardens of Babylon and all that, and you'll find out he's a real character. Well, Nebuchadnezzar at one point conquered the entire known world, and he is in the book of Daniel. He conquered Israel and took a bunch of Israeli kids captive. His plan was to educate them in the ways of Babylon, make them leaders, and then send them back, and they would rule their countries as puppet rulers and introduce the Babylonian culture to their people, and that's how he would make his kingdom last forever. That was his plan. And so in chapter 1 of Daniel, he kidnapped these 4 kids, and he was feeding them the best food, and these kids were like, oh my gosh, we can't eat this meat, it's not kosher. And so they prayed and they sought a way to get out of eating this defiled meat. And so the captain of the guard took a liking to him, and they said, listen, do me a favor, do us a favor, don't give us that spoiled, nasty Babylonian meat, just give us vegetables, we'll become vegans. And the king was like, I can't do that, man, you guys will look sickly and the king will take my head. No, trust us, try it out for a week and we'll see. And so sure enough, the guy said, okay, I'll give it a shot. And after this time of training, they were brought before the king Nebuchadnezzar, and they were studied, and they found him the best and the brightest out of the whole group of people. And they didn't want to compromise their beliefs. I mean, they could have justified it, God, you certainly want us to live and not die, and so we could eat this meat. And they could have, but they took a stand and said, God, man, give us a way out. Give us a way out. And God gave them a way out. So in chapter 2, King Nebuchadnezzar has this horrible dream. he must have ate some bad Taco Bell or something. But he had this dream, and he demanded all the wise men of Babylon come and not only interpret his dream, but tell him what his dream meant. And nobody could tell him. He said, I know you guys have wicked intentions. And he commanded that all the wise men be killed. And the decree went out, and then Daniel and his three buddies were like, what's going on? He's like, you're going to be killed because the king. He's like, you tell the king, you give me a day, and I'll come. And Daniel spent the evening in prayer. Not only did God reveal Nebuchadnezzar's dream to Daniel, he helped him interpret it. And so Daniel went into the king, and he told him his dream. And the king basically dreamt about this big image and gold and silver. And Daniel chapter 2, it literally predicts all the future kingdoms that were going to come on planet Earth to today. And super awesome prophecy. Daniel's just a great book for that. And so he said, you're going to be conquered by this other kingdom, and then another kingdom after that, another kingdom after that. And, this image of gold with hands crossed, down to a body. And so when the king saw that, the king answered them and said this, truly, your God is a God of gods, a Lord of kings, and a revealer of secrets, since you could reveal this secret. Then the king promoted Daniel. So this was Nebuchadnezzar's first experience with the God of Israel through Daniel. Now in chapter 3, King Nebuchadnezzar started thinking about that dream. And so he sets up this image. But instead of gold and then silver for the next kingdom, and then bronze and then iron mixed with clay, he set up an entire image made of gold, basically saying, I'm never going to be conquered. And he demanded that people worship this image, and that they would play all this music, and everybody would fall down and worship. And Daniel's three friends were like, you can't do that. You can't worship that image, man. It's bad. So the music played, and everybody fell down, and those three dudes were standing in the back. Nebuchadnezzar's like, what are you doing? He's like, you guys got to bow down and worship the image. And they were like, nah, we can't do that, king. He says, don't you know I'm going to throw you in the fiery furnace? And they said, yeah, we don't think so. So they answered the king. This is great. I put this up in my Facebook feed. He said, don't you know I'm going to throw this? And Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, they're going by their Babylonian names, said to the king, O Nebuchadnezzar, we're not going to be careful to answer you in this matter. If that is the case, that you're going to throw us in the fiery furnace, our God, whom we serve, is able to deliver us from the burning fiery furnace, and he will deliver us from your hand, O king. They said, look, our God's so powerful, you could throw us in there and nothing's going to happen. But if not, they couched their they definitely covered their bases. But if not, let it be known to you, O king, that we do not serve your gods, nor will we worship the gold image which you have set up. And Nebuchadnezzar got pissed. And so he ordered that the furnace be heated up 7 times hotter than it was. In fact, the guys that went to throw Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego into the fiery furnace, they caught on fire and died. And the king looked down into the pit of the furnace, and he sees 4 people walking around down there. And it says the 4th one was like the Bar Elohim, the Son of God. He said, hey, Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, come out of there. And they popped out. And the only thing that burned was the ropes that bound them, baby. And the king was blown away. And he says, in verse 28 of chapter 3, he says, blessed be the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, who sent his angel and delivered his servants who trusted in him. And they have frustrated the king's word and yielded their bodies that they should not serve or worship any god except their own God. Therefore I make a decree that any people, nation, language who speaks anything amiss about the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego shall be cut in pieces, and their houses shall be made an ash heap, because there is no other God who can deliver like this. So the king, Nebuchadnezzar, has a second experience with the God of Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, the God of Israel. And he's like, dude, that's a pretty cool God. Now, this is the kicker. Chapter 4 of the book of Daniel. All right? The Bible is written by about 40 guys over a period of 2,000 years. But the guy who wrote chapter 4 of the book of Daniel was none other than King Nebuchadnezzar. This guy wrote chapter 4 of the book of Daniel. It was turned into a little pamphlet and circulated around Babylon. It was the king's God story. It's a great story. I'm going to read the whole chapter. But I was at the No Nuke rally in 1982. They let everybody ride the trains free that day. We skipped school and walked, milled about through the city, and there was people with big nuclear bomb clouds on their heads, and all kinds of people giving out literature. There's the commies, the socialists, the unionists. They had this group, that group, and people just giving out stuff. And I was just walking down. I was just taking it all, And there was one sheepish guy standing, and he was like, I'll never forget it. Hands me a little pamphlet, and I grab it. Thank you so much. And I start walking. I glanced at it, and it was a little Jesus thing, And I look at the back, and it said Jews for Jesus. And I was like, what? Jews for Jesus? This is a joke. Jews don't believe in Jesus. But man, I pinned that to my wall, and inside there was the first verse I ever memorized. John 15:13. Greater love has no man than this, that a man lay down his life for his friends. And I would come home drunk and stoned and look at that thing and look at the back. This is a joke, man. This isn't real. Jews don't believe in Jesus. But they do. And so that was a little seed. That was like the previous two things I just read about Nebuchadnezzar. It's stuck in my noodle. So chapter 4 of the book of Daniel. This is going to sound like one of the letters of Paul in the New Testament. Nebuchadnezzar the thing, to all peoples, nations, languages that dwell in the earth, peace be multiplied to you. I thought it good to declare to you the signs and wonders that the Most High God has worked for me. How great are his signs, how mighty are his wonders. His kingdom is an everlasting kingdom, and his dominion is from generation to generation. This is the king's God story. He goes on to say that he was in his palace and he had another incident with the Taco Bell, and he had this horrible dream, and he commanded that they interpret his dream, and nobody could interpret the dream. And so finally Daniel comes, and he tells a dream to Daniel, and Daniel's just astonished and sits quiet. And he realizes what the dream was, and he says, Daniel, it's okay. Tell me what the dream means. And he said, Belteshazzar, that's what they called him in verse 19. Said, my Lord, may the dream concern those who hate you, and its interpretation concern your enemies. Basically, he said, Nebuchadnezzar, you're going to go crazy for a period of 7 years. You're going to crawl around in your belly like an ox, eating grass, and you're going to lose your mind. But after 7 years, your reason's going to return to you, and you're going to be restored to your kingdom and all your glory. He said, until you acknowledge that the God of heaven is the true God. And sometimes God will allow you to experience madness. You'll go over the edge. You'll lose your mind. You'll do things you never thought you could possibly do. And then God will come into your life and it'll make you realize that you could do nothing without him. So, at the end of the 7 years of madness, where they literally put a cage around him, he lived outside eating grass like an ox. Verse 34. Listen to this. This is just awesome. And at the end of the time, I, Nebuchadnezzar, lifted my eyes to heaven, and my understanding returned to me, and I blessed the Most High, and praised and honored him who lives forever. His dominion is an everlasting dominion. His kingdom is from generation to generation. All the inhabitants of the earth are reputed as nothing. He does according to his will in the army of heaven and among the inhabitants of the earth. No one can restrain his hand or say to him, "What have you done?" At the same time, my reason returned to me for the glory of my kingdom. My honor, my splendor returned to me. My counselors, my nobles resorted to me, and I was restored to my kingdom, and excellent majesty was added to me. He glowed with the presence of Jesus, man, with the glory, with the joy. Excellent majesty was added to me. Now I, Nebuchadnezzar, praise and extol and honor the King of heaven, all whose works are truth and his ways are justice, and those who walk in pride he is able to humble. Nebuchadnezzar's in heaven, man. He's there. He made it. Daniel prayed for that guy. The ruthless king. But God brought him to his knees. Nebuchadnezzar did a lot of bad things. But God looked beyond those things and saw inside his heart and said, deep down inside, there's something in there that this guy's got that I want to have. That's the king of Babylon's God story. What's your story? Do you have a story? If you do, you need to share it. Because you never know. It just might be a seed. It might just be a little seed that you drop in someone's heart. And someone else will come along and share a little bit more. Maybe God's just prepping them. But if you got a God story, you're not supposed to keep it to yourself. You're supposed to share it. And if you don't have a God story, you need to get a God story. You don't want to be caught dead without Jesus, man. Peace.